Okay, so you know how sometimes when you're really trying to keep up with everything that's happening with government acquisitions,
Yeah.
especially in the DoD,
Yeah.
it can feel kind of like you're trying to learn a whole new language.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
a lot to keep track of.
Right. It really is. And staying ahead of the game, that's really what we're all about, and that's what we're going to dive into today.
Yeah, we're going to take a close look at the Forged Act and really zoom in on one specific recommendation in it.
Yep.
Section 319.
Section 319, that's right.
And think of this deep dive as your cheat sheet or your shortcut guide to understanding, what this section actually means for fairness in DoD acquisitions.
Right, and how to get ready for it.
And more importantly, how you might start thinking about, getting ready for implementing it.
Exactly. Our mission today is to really unpack Section 319, figure out what's the big idea behind it. How's it supposed to prevent those unfair advantages that technical advisors might have? And then give you some ideas to chew on about how organizations and individuals can start preparing for it and implementing all the suggestions.
Absolutely.
This is part of a series, by the way,
Yeah.
where we're tackling all the recommendations in the Forged Act. So this is one piece of a much bigger picture that we're putting together for you.
Exactly.
Just one piece.
One piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and as we explore Section 319, I think it's really important to remember that the mitigations and the measures of success that we'll be talking about, they're written as suggested in the Act.
Yes, that's an important distinction.
Right. And the alternative approaches are written as potential alternative approaches.
Right.
And that kind of tells us that, there's some wiggle room. There's some room for different interpretations.
Absolutely.
And adaptations as organizations, move forward with all of this.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's guidance.
So let's jump right into Section 319. Basically, the main thing seems to be that the Secretary of Defense has 180 days to issue guidance to prevent unfair competitive advantages for technical advisors in DoD acquisitions.
Yep.
Pretty clear directive, right?
Yes. Very clear. And I think it's worth pointing out a couple of things right away.
Yep.
This new section actually repeals some of the authorities from the 2016 NDAA.
Okay.
And it mandates a report within 1 year.
Wow.
So this is not just a small change. This is a significant
huge
shift and focus on this particular issue.
To understand why this is such a big deal now, I think it's helpful to have a little bit of background.
Absolutely.
I mean, this isn't a brand new concern, is it?
No, not at all.
This idea of keeping things fair and, by the book in DoD acquisitions, this has been around for a while.
You're absolutely right. Concerns about competition and fairness, they go way back to at least the 1986 Packard Commission.
Wow. Okay.
Initially that was focused on conflicts of interest with companies bidding on contracts. But over time, the focus has shifted a bit to scrutinize another group.
Okay.
Technical advisors.
Interesting.
And, we're talking about organizations like STRLs, federally funded research and development centers, FFRDCs, and even some nonprofits who, have an advisory role.
So they're in the mix giving advice.
Exactly. They're providing guidance and expertise.
And the potential for unfairness pops up because these advisors, they kind of wear two hats.
Right?
They're advising the DoD on technical stuff, but they might also be in a spot to either compete for contracts themselves or influence things to help certain bidders.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Right.
They're advising the government, but they might also be bidding on contracts or,
have a horse in the race.
Yeah, exactly. Have a stake in the outcome.
So GAO reports back in the 2000s really brought this to everyone's attention, didn't they?
They did. They highlighted the risks when advisors have this, privileged access to information that other bidders don't. And a 2016 NDAA tried to deal with this through Section 881, which mandated conflict of interest policies for these advisors.
Okay, so there was an attempt to kind of fix this back then.
Yeah, it was an initial step.
So why is Section 319 needed now? What's different?
Well, even with those steps in 2016, different reviews and analyses showed that there were still gaps in how these policies were being put into practice. The concerns about advisors having too much influence on contracts, they didn't go away.
Right, they stuck around.
They persisted. So Section 319 is really like refining and in many ways strengthening that earlier framework.
Okay.
It's a response to those ongoing concerns about keeping competition real and transparent. And it actually replaces the 2016 authority with what seems to be more robust and clearly defined guidance and oversight.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So looking ahead, what are we hoping to see? What are the desired effects that this recommendation is trying to achieve?
The desired effects are really all about, strengthening the integrity of the acquisition process.
Right, making sure it's all on the up and up.
Exactly. The main goal is to prevent technical advisors from unfairly swaying decisions about who gets contracts.
So no more playing favorites.
No more playing favorites. And then second, it wants to encourage more competition by limiting what these advisors can actually do in the acquisition process.
Okay, so it's about limiting their ability to influence the decision
Yeah.
and their actual involvement in like the bidding and evaluation stages.
Precisely. It's about setting clear boundaries.
Gotcha. So what else is on the wish list here?
Well, the third thing is there's this big push for transparency.
Okay, more openness.
More openness, yeah.
Yeah.
Section 319 wants to do this by making sure there are really clear processes for reporting any possible conflicts of interest.
Makes sense. You got to know what you're dealing with.
Exactly. And then the fourth thing, it recognizes that these advisors, they often have really valuable technical skills and knowledge.
They're the experts.
Exactly. So it includes provisions for waivers.
Okay.
This way, advisors who can show they're impartial, they can still contribute their expertise.
So it's about balancing the need for oversight with, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. It's about making sure we don't lose valuable expertise just because of potential conflicts.
And what's the last piece of this desired outcome puzzle?
The final piece is accountability.
Okay.
So we need to have ways to deal with violations of these guidelines. And that includes things like disciplinary actions if necessary.
So there are consequences if someone steps out of line.
Exactly. It's about making sure everyone takes these guidelines seriously.
These all sound like really great goals. For the acquisition process.
I think so.
But let's be realistic for a second. Any big change like this is probably going to have some downsides, right?
Oh, for sure. There are always potential challenges.
What are some of the potential negative impacts that organizations should be thinking about?
Yeah, so one potential challenge is that by restricting what technical advisors can do, we might end up with fewer experts available in the acquisition process.
Oh, that's a good point. Fewer people to actually do the work.
Right. And another concern is the waiver process. It's important for flexibility, but it could cause delays in decisions if it's not handled efficiently.
Oh, yeah. Delays can really mess things up.
Absolutely. They can throw a wrench in the works.
What other potential problems might we see?
Well, increased oversight is another big one.
Okay.
Putting these new guidelines into practice and enforcing them, it's going to mean more work for program offices.
Yeah, more paperwork, more procedures.
Yeah, because they'll be responsible for making sure everyone's following the rules and managing the whole waiver process.
That makes sense.
And then there's another thing. If the definition of who's a technical advisor is too broad or unclear, we might accidentally exclude really qualified experts who don't actually pose a conflict.
That's a good point. You don't want to throw out the good with the bad.
Exactly. And finally, by focusing so much on technical advisors, we might miss potential conflicts with other contractors involved.
Oh, so it's like a tunnel vision kind of thing.
Yeah, we need to make sure we're looking at the whole picture.
So it's kind of a balancing act, isn't it? You're trying to be fair, but you don't want to slow things down or lose access to important knowledge.
That's exactly it. It's a delicate balance.
So how does the Act suggest that we navigate all these potential pitfalls? What mitigations are they proposing to, soften the blow of these negative impacts?
Well, the Act has several suggestions for being proactive. To deal with the potential shortage of experts, the idea is to expand the pool of advisors that the DoD can use.
Okay, so cast a wider net.
Exactly, and specifically include more outside experts who might have fewer conflicts.
Bring in some fresh perspectives.
That's the idea. And then to streamline the waiver process and avoid those delays, they suggest setting up clear, well-defined criteria for reviewing and approving waiver requests.
Yeah, so everyone knows the rules of the game.
Exactly. And that can help things move more smoothly.
Having clear criteria seems so important for making that waiver process efficient.
It really does. It takes the guesswork out of it.
What about all the extra work for the program offices?
Well, to help with that, the suggestion is to use technology to automate a lot of the oversight reporting.
Oh, so less paperwork, more computer work.
Exactly. That could really lighten the load for program staff.
Makes sense.
And to avoid excluding good advisors because of a fuzzy definition, The recommendation says those definitions need to be more precise and focused.
So everyone knows exactly who we're talking about.
Right. It's about being clear and specific.
And finally, to catch those broader contractor conflicts.
Yeah.
The idea is to expand conflict checks to include everyone involved in the acquisition process.
Everyone, not just the technical advisors.
So no more slipping through the cracks.
No more cracks to slip through.
I like that these seem like really practical steps that could help make this whole thing go a lot smoother.
I agree. They're practical, and they address the potential concerns head on.
Now let's think about the people who are going to be dealing with these changes every day.
Yeah.
Which DoD personnel really need to understand Section 319?
Well, several groups within the DoD are going to feel the impact. Acquisition officials in general, they'll need to learn the new guidance and adapt to a system where advisors might have more limited roles.
So there's a new way of doing things.
New way of working together, and then program managers, they're probably going to have more on their plate.
More responsibilities.
Yeah, they'll be tasked with spotting potential conflicts, managing the reporting, and handling those waiver requests.
So they're going to be busy.
They'll definitely be busy, and then contracting officers will also be on the front lines.
Right.
They'll have to enforce these new policies and get really good at spotting and managing conflicts.
So a lot of responsibility there.
A lot of responsibility. And finally, the staff at STRLs and FFRDCs, they might find that they can't do as many acquisition tasks as they used to.
Okay.
Which could mean they focus more on their core technical advising roles.
So kind of back to basics.
In a way, yeah, back to their main expertise.
So it's a pretty big group of people who need to pay attention to this.
A lot of folks are going to be affected by this.
And it's also worth thinking about the fact that, not everyone's going to be thrilled about these changes.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Right.
Not everyone embraces change with open arms.
Which stakeholders might be opposed to Section 319 and why?
Well, we could see some pushback, especially from STRLs and FFRDCs.
Okay.
They might worry about losing influence in the acquisition process.
Right, which could mean less funding.
Exactly, less funding, fewer opportunities, and then some contractors who have had, good relationships with certain advisors, they might resist these changes too.
Because they were benefiting from that.
Right, that access might have given them an edge in competitions.
Right, an inside track.
Exactly. And lastly, some DoD technical staff who liked having advisors in those dual roles, they might worry about things getting bogged down or more bureaucracy.
So it's important to acknowledge these different perspectives.
Absolutely. We need to understand where everyone's coming from.
As organizations get ready for these changes.
It's about bringing everyone on board.
Now, what kind of additional resources might the DoD need to make sure that implementing Section 319 is successful?
Right. It's not just about issuing a memo and calling it a day.
Right.
Successful implementation is going to require more than just updated rules.
You need the tools and the people.
Exactly. First, we're probably going to need funding to develop the IT systems for tracking compliance, managing waivers, and spotting potential violations.
Oh, yeah. The tech side of things.
Right. We need the systems to support this, and then we need training.
Training on the new policy.
Yeah, comprehensive training on all these new conflict of interest policies, and that training needs to happen fast, ideally within that 180-day time frame.
No time to waste.
Exactly. And then we need people.
Right. Qualified people to do the work.
Yeah, adequate personnel to manage the waiver reviews and make sure everyone's following the rules, especially as that one-year report deadline gets closer.
So it's about having the right rules, the right tools, and the right people all working together.
That's the recipe for success.
Now, the Act also gives us some hints about how we'll know if these efforts are actually working.
Yeah. The measures of success.
Right. And as we said before, these are just suggestions.
Right. They're guidelines, not hard and fast rules.
One important indicator could be a small number of conflict violation reports.
Yeah, they're suggesting less than 5% annually.
Okay, so keeping those violations low.
Keeping them low, and another suggestion is to look at how efficient the waiver process is. The goal is to get those processed in less than 30 days on average.
So keep things moving quickly.
Keep it moving, and then there's the whole idea of fairness in how contracts are awarded.
Right, is it actually perceived as fair?
Yeah, and the goal is to have 90% or more of the stakeholders feeling like the process is equitable.
That's a high bar.
It is. It's ambitious, but I think it's achievable.
Yeah, it's a good target to shoot for. And these metrics would probably be looked at after that first-year report is done.
Exactly. That's when we can really assess how things are going.
Yeah. And the Act also recognizes that there might be different ways to achieve these goals, right?
Yeah, they offer some potential alternative approaches.
Right, so maybe different paths to the same destination.
Exactly. And the source material suggests a couple of things to think about.
Okay, what are they?
One idea is to really ramp up ethics training for those technical advisors.
Okay.
The thinking is that by making them more aware of ethical issues and giving them clear guidance,
Mm-hmm.
you might be able to reduce bias without having to put really strict limits on what they can do.
So it's more about education and awareness.
Exactly. It's about empowering them to make good ethical choices.
And what's the other alternative approach?
The other idea is to create a sophisticated digital tool for tracking potential conflicts of interest.
Oh, so a text solution.
Yeah, this kind of tool could make things more transparent and streamline how conflicts are managed.
So it's about using technology to make the process more efficient.
Exactly. And it could be more effective than just relying on written policies.
So these alternative approaches aren't necessarily, replacing the core recommendations of Section 319.
Right.
They're just offering different ways, or maybe additional ways.
Yeah, complementary ways.
To get to that same goal of fairness and transparency in DoD acquisitions.
That's the key takeaway.
So to wrap up our deep dive on Section 319,
Yeah.
could you give us like a quick summary of the main points for our listeners?
Sure. Basically, Section 319 of the Forged Act, it's a big step towards making Department of Defense acquisitions more fair.
Mm-hmm. A big step in the right direction.
It tries to address those concerns about advisors having an unfair advantage that have been around for a while.
Right. Those concerns aren't going away.
They're not, and it builds on what was done before, like in the 2016 NDAA,
Mm-hmm.
but it introduces more specific and potentially stricter guidance and oversight.
So it's about raising the bar.
Exactly, and the challenge now is to find the right balance.
That's the key, isn't it?
It is. We want to prevent advisors from having too much influence, but we also want to make sure the DoD can still tap into their expertise.
Right. You need that knowledge.
Exactly. And then we have to figure out how to manage all the extra oversight responsibilities that come with these changes.
So a lot to consider.
A lot to think about and plan for.
Thank you so much for breaking down Section 319 for us.
You're welcome.
It's clear that this part of the Forged Act is going to change how the DoD does business and works with technical advisors.
Yeah, it's a significant shift.
So for our listeners, this deep dive should give you a good understanding of what Section 319 is all about and what it's trying to achieve.
Absolutely a good foundation.
And as you think about this, remember that putting these recommendations into practice takes planning and preparation within your organization.
Right. It's not going to happen overnight.
Especially since those mitigations and measures of success, they're just suggestions.
Yeah, they're meant to be a starting point.
And there might be other approaches that are worth exploring.
Absolutely. Think outside the box.
So as organizations start to adapt to this new guidance, here's a question to think about.
Okay.
Given this push for more transparency and, preventing unfair advantages, how can individuals within the acquisition ecosystem proactively identify, disclose, and manage potential conflicts of interest,
That's a great question.
even before the official guidance is out?
Yeah, taking initiative now could really put you ahead of the game.
Exactly. A little bit of foresight can go a long way.
Absolutely.
So we encourage you to really think about what Section 319 means for you,
Yeah.
and maybe take a look at the full Forged Act yourself
Yeah, get the full picture.
to get a more complete understanding of all these changes.
It's worth the read.
And this is just the start of our exploration of the Forged Act.
Yeah, we're just getting started.
We'll be back to unpack other sections in future deep dives.
Definitely more to come.
So stay tuned as we continue to learn and stay informed together.
Absolutely.